Howdy, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Cowboys of the Osage podcast. This is old Cody over here, and as always, I have my co-host with me, Mr. Rodeo historian himself, Jimbo Snively. Hey, it's a special day today, Jimbo. Tell us who we have.
Hey, Cody boy, it's another great day in the Osage, man. And Cody, it's not too many times you get to talk to a true living legend, but that's what we've got today. He was a 27 times national finalist, 13 times in the calf open and 14 times in the steer open. He won the national final average 7 times. Now just let that sink in a minute. 7 national final average titles. Only one man I know of has got more than that. And he was a 2 times world champion steer roper. He won the very first national finals calf roping in 1959 in Dallas, Texas, and was at the age of 22 years old. And he's won the Ben Johnson here twice, right here in Pawhuska. And we're just proud to talk to him today, coming to us from Louisiana. I'm talking about Mr. Olin Young. And Olin, welcome to the Cowboys of the Osage podcast.
Well, thank you.
Well, Olin, you're one of my heroes for sure. And you grew up out in New Mexico. Who were some of the people that you looked up to as a kid?
Well, I was neighbors to Troy Fort.
Right.
And I roped some. Growing up, I roped at his place some. And in fact, my first steer I ever tied was at his place.
Wow. You know, New Mexico has...
I don't know what year it was.
Right. Well, your dad helped you a lot, too, get started and everything. Did he rope, too, or did he just want you to be a roper?
Yes, sir, he roped, but he didn't rope. He didn't rope professionally. He didn't go, to them like we did,
Right. Well, there was New Mexico has a heck of a history of ropers out there. I mean, going all the way back to Jake McClure, who roped back in my grandpa's day, and Bob Crosby and all those guys. They had to be did they influence you as a kid? I mean, did you growing up wanting to be a champion roper?
Oh, yeah. You bet I wanted to. My dad was friends of all of them. And Sonny's dad, Sonny Davis's dad, and Red, they called him.
Right.
And I think Cotton Lee over
down
in there, and different ones.
Yeah, and you had the Cooper brothers, Jimmy and Tough Cooper, and they're just a very rich history from New Mexico. And then later on in your time, you had not only yourself, but of course Sonny Davis and Glenn Franklin. I mean, New Mexico's turned out a lot of roping talent for sure.
Oh, they sure did.
Yeah, Mr. Young, old Cotton Lee, he really helped my dad along back in those days. My family's from New Mexico. This is Cody over here.
Yes, sir.
You probably remember Rocky Garnett. He won Cheyenne I don't know how many times, and Cody's his son, and Cody comes from a rich roping family and from out there in New Mexico too.
I see.
But when you won the first national finals at you went to your first professional roping at 50 in 1954, but you won the first national finals calf roping at the age of 22. That had to be a unbelievable thrill, didn't it?
Yeah, it was.
I mean, that was one tough calf roping back then. Just looking at the names, Dean Oliver and Jim Bob Altizer and Glenn Franklin, Tom Neesmith, Dale Smith. That was just a who's who of calf ropers. And you went out there as just basically a pretty much a kid, 22, and beat them. That's remarkable.
Well, I just, lucky, I guess.
I don't think it was luck at all. What was it like to rope in that first national final? What did you guys think of the national finals?
Well, when we got there and went and looked at the calves, we kind of got a surprise as mighty, pretty big fresh calves. Now I want you to know.
Did you leg them all down, Olin?
I legged them, yes, sir.
Was anybody flanking them then, or were they mostly all legged them?
Yeah, Dean Oliver was flanking, and Glenn,
Yeah.
and most of the boys flanked. You know.
Okay. They were getting off the left though, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've seen pictures of those old calves and back then. They were pretty good size for sure. Were you riding Silky then?
No, sir. I was riding a horse that belonged to a fella from San Saba, Texas, John Ed Rogers.
Yeah.
I borrowed his horse, and I roped on him quite a few times, but he's a pretty nice horse.
When did you get Silky?
I got Silky in 1960.
Okay. What made him so good, Olin?
Oh, he was a little older horse than when I started. Well, when I got him, he was fairly old. You know,
Right.
He was about 12, I think, when I got him.
Yeah. He'd come off the track, hadn't he?
Well, the Wardlows raised him.
Okay.
Wardlow brothers raised him down there in Texas, but
Yeah.
I bought him from Buff Galford.
Yeah. They said if they'd had a horse of the year back then, he'd have won it several times.
He was a fine horse, I'll tell you. He really was.
Hey, Olin, for everybody out there, how the heck did you rope the neck so good and the horns so good every time? What's the big difference in roping horns and roping a neck, is what I mean.
Well, it's a little different, you know. You rope going across on steers, and you rope kind of more going down, you know, on a calf.
You know, the one thing I remember about your roping, Olin, when you roped a calf or a steer, there wasn't any slack in the rope. I mean, you pulled it down slick around their necks or around the horns, tighter than anybody I believe I ever saw rope.
Well, I tried to do that for that. But,
well, you sure did. I never seen anybody. You couldn't stick your finger in between the rope and that calf's neck when you rope one usually. But when y'all went to the finals, did you realize it was going to get as big as it is now, or did you realize it at the time, or was it just another roping to you?
Well, no, man, I'll tell you, when I pulled up at the rodeo grounds in Gladewater, Texas, and Lanham Riley was the calf roping director, and he told all of us that they was going to have the finals. It really made me feel good because I like to rope more than one or two heads, three heads, you know.
Right.
The more you rope, the better I felt I had a chance. I don't know why, but
well, cream comes to the top, I think, is why. But
anyway, I was real thrilled to find out they was going to have the finals.
Well, I bet. And then they moved it to Los Angeles. What was it like roping out there in Los Angeles?
Well, it was, they had to haul in all the animals to the place they had it.
Right.
And they kept them out of town out there somewhere, but
just had to haul them in every day, or I guess
they had to haul them. Yeah, they'd haul them back and forth every day.
Right.
Did they have big crowds out there at the Los Angeles National Finals?
Pretty good sized crowds. You bet you.
Did any movie stars show up to watch y'all rope that time?
I don't know.
He's worried about roping.
Yeah, worried about winning. I think you won the average out there twice, didn't you, at Los Angeles? 62.
I think so.
I believe you did back to back, 62 and 63. That's pretty special, for sure. Huh. Well, there was some tough calf ropers back then, wasn't there, Olin? I mean,
Oh man,
just as tough
that's
as.
as ones I was ever up against.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're talking about Jim Bob and Glenn Franklin and Dean Oliver. What the great Dean Oliver, 8 world championships. Olin, what made him so tough?
Well, he was an athlete, and he worked at it. He stayed in shape, and he run a lot, and he practiced a lot too.
Yeah, he was like you said, he was an athlete, and he was pretty good size too, wasn't he? Wasn't he like 6'4"?
He was big. I imagine he was 6'3" or 4" or
Yeah.
5. I don't know, but he and Sonny Davis were both. They were the biggest 2 ropers we roped against.
Yeah. Well, Sonny Davis, he was an athlete, wasn't he, Olin?
Oh, he was.
I tried to describe him to people that never saw him rope, or maybe saw him in his later years, stuff in the seniors or something. But I can't describe just how athletic and good, and he was just always going 100 mile an hour. And
he was always good. I would see he and I made junior rodeos together.
Right.
When we was growing up, we made all of them we could get to.
Right. Well, did your dad Paul and Red, did they follow you around quite a bit, or when you were rodeoing?
Oh yeah. My dad, Sonny's dad did too, but not as much as my dad. And then later on, he was just with us, He go right along with us, and
I bet you made him proud for sure.
He done a lot of driving.
Yeah. He must have been tickled to see you win those averages and stuff. That had to be a real treat for him to see his son have that kind of success.
He had to have a great work ethic too, I believe. Could you tell us what a typical day in the practice pen with you would have been back then, Olin?
Well, I couldn't get enough practice hardly. We couldn't afford the calves, to have a lot of practice, but my dad done the best he could. He tried to keep us in calves.
What about when you started roping steers and you're roping calves too? What was your practices like then?
Well, I was mainly going to other places and roping in different arenas, and different boys, friends of mine, and I'd go and rope with them some, and they'd come and rope with me, and then in the early 60s, and I got my own place there in Albuquerque, in Peralta, they called it then, and about in I think 62, we built a house there. I bought some property and built a house up there, and that's where I lived for 20 years.
Did you have an indoor arena, Olin, or outdoor?
No, it was outdoor.
Yeah, not too many people had indoors back then, did they?
No,
yeah,
sure didn't.
Yeah. Well, what was your favorite roping to go to? When you kind of stayed in the Northwest a lot, didn't you? Did you go back east much?
I didn't go back east except I went to in 57 and 59. I went to New York.
Did you?
And made Boston in 59.
Yeah.
What'd you think of it back there?
Well, you couldn't jerk them down. It's a fine for jerking them down. But other than that, it was just like what we normally do. They roped some pretty good sized calves back when I was at the first rodeo in New York I went to is they roped some Santa Gertrudis calves, and they were tall and lanky.
How did you guys get back there back in them days? How did you travel to New York City or to Pendleton, Oregon? What kind of rodeo rig did you have?
Oh, I had an inline trailer, and usually haul two horses, a calf horse and steer horse. And then sometimes we were traveling together. We'd put our horses in the two horses in one trailer and go along together,
Yeah. I've heard of those calves back at New York. They'd be pretty big by late in the year in the fall, and like you say, you couldn't jerk them down and just turn them around. They'd meet you. They'd come up the rope, meet you sometimes, wouldn't they, Olin?
Yes, they would.
Well, where would you guys have to? You just rolled downtown New York City. Where were the pens at that you kept your horses?
We kept our horses there in the building, Madison Square Garden. Now that was in a different place than where Madison Square Garden is now.
Oh, okay.
It was on 5th Street, I think, or something. But anyway, it's a different spot than where they have it now.
I bet New York was a little different than Peralta, New Mexico, wasn't it, Olin?
Quite a bit.
That'd be a culture shock for me, I know.
We roped. We drove out there the first year I went, and we was in Kansas City and drove all the way to New York. 3 of us in a car, and we pulled up on the road that the Square Garden building was on, and them little colored boys when they look back there, they's all hanging on their trailer.
Where did you park your trailers and stuff up there? Was there room for everybody to get parked?
Well, they had a place we had to go take them and leave them,
Yeah.
till it was over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you know an old boy back then by the name of Junior Vaughn?
Oh, yeah.
I heard a story about him at Madison Square Garden one time, Olin, where I guess Junior was pretty bad to drink every now and then, and he was winning Madison Square Garden or something, and they got him drunk and hid his boots from him, and he showed up and won it barefooted. Did you ever hear anything like that?
Yeah, oh yeah, I've heard it on him.
That's a great story, though.
I pulled up at Vernon, Texas one time, and he was drunker than a skunk, and trying to find a horse to ride, and he wound up riding Jimbo's horse. He borrowed Jimbo's horse, and he rode barefooted.
How'd he get along?
Well, he done fine. I don't think you could tell the difference.
Boy, that'd be bad for one of them big old calves to step on your top of your bare foot right there on your instep, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and it had rained, and it was muddy. Oh, dang, it was muddy. And anyway, but it didn't bother him. He just waded right through it.
Olin, and I think it was 1966, you were either leading the world in calf roping or just real close to leading it. And over at Veneta, you had a horse, as you ducked under the rope, you had a horse step on your foot and break your ankle.
Yes, sir.
That probably cost you a good chance of winning the title that year, didn't it?
Well, I was in the lead,
Was you?
But it didn't. But that ended that.
Right.
Dean Oliver won it that year.
Yeah. Yeah, he had a habit of doing that, didn't he?
Yeah, sure it is. Yep.
You remember roping over here at Pawhuska at the Ben Johnson, Olin?
Oh yeah, a bunch of times.
For people that's never been here, tell them what's kind of different about this roping over here than a lot of other ropings.
Well, it's just it's just like turning, just having a pen full of steers out in a pasture.
It's a big arena over here.
A big arena, just awful big.
I heard, Olin, that Sonny Davis kind of talked you into roping steers. Is that right?
You're sure right.
And maybe the first time you went to finals, 66, you won second in the world. That's pretty amazing. Won Cheyenne that year and everything. So you took to it pretty good, it sounded like.
Well, I was, like you say, I was pretty lucky. But I could rope horns, and that's one thing that helped me is I could rope his horns pretty good, and I didn't miss many, No,
I'll agree with that. You didn't miss many.
Yeah.
Why were you such a good horn roper? Because your background was roping calves. Where did that horn roping come from?
Well, I was just always, when I'd go to somebody's place or something, I went with Troy a lot, and he was roping steers too, see.
Right.
But most of the places he went, the ropers' places he went, they all had a dummy horn set up on bales of hay or
right
on a bench or something, and I was always roping them, just
Right, sure.
I was just a young kid with Troy, and he was going wide open, and I was about 15 or 16 years old.
Yeah. Right. Well, you mentioned.
I remember we was at Schultz Webster's one year, and he had his horns set up on a kind of a dummy that set up off the ground a ways, and you kind of was roping up at them,
Right.
And I'm telling you, they were hard to rope.
They were probably some of Fred Lowry's old horns, maybe. Might have been.
It probably was.
Huh.
Probably was.
Olin, back then they used to rope for a lot of money in the steer roping at some jackpot ropings and some match ropings. What's the biggest entry fee you remember paying at a steer roping?
I think 1,000.
Yeah. You mentioned Jim Bob a while ago, and he was famous for all those match ropings he had with Dean Oliver. Did you ever rope any of them big match ropings and calf roping, Olin?
I roped Jim Bob. Well, he had a lot to do with it, but he and I roped, I don't know, 2 or 3 times, and I never could beat him.
Yeah, he was awful tough in those match ropings, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, he was tough.
Oh, I know it.
Any way he went, he was tough.
My dad was down at San Angelo that first match roping he had with Dean Oliver, and he said they'd roping them big old calves, and they just come out there and tying them in 11, 12, just as fast as they could turn them out, Said it was really good watching.
Was your dad Jim?
Jimmy, Joe's brother. My grandfather was Jim.
Okay.
Yeah, you remember him,
What's
I'm sure.
Joe doing?
Well, Joe, I just talked to him last night, and he's up in Kansas and doing good, and wanted me to be sure and tell you hello.
Well, the last that I knew of him, he was going with a girl from Pendleton, Oregon. And in fact, he went up there, I think, to be with her or something about the time of the Pendleton Roundup.
Yeah, well, there's no telling about Joe,
But her brother roped steers.
Okay.
And I can't think of his name, but
yeah. Well,
he was a pretty good hand.
Yeah. But
That Pendleton Oregon's pretty wild up there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
Did you ever win Pendleton, Olin?
I won. Some go around money.
Yeah.
But I didn't win any average money. I don't think.
Yeah. Well, you had a good steer horse. I remember when you first started roping steers, you was riding a bay horse. I think his name was Pete. Is that right?
That was Jim Prather's horse.
Jim Prather's horse. You got along pretty good with him, didn't you?
Yes, sir. Real good.
Yeah, you won a lot of money on him. But
what do you think about these rodeo horses now bringing way over $100,000? Some of them $200,000.
Well, they're hard to come by, and when you got to give that kind of money for them, they got to be good.
Speaking of money, when you won that first National Finals, Olin out there down there in Dallas, I think you won $2,086 for winning the calf roping. And now the go-arounds pay $27,000, and the average is like $69,000. What do you think about that kind of money that you rope for now?
Oh, it's unbelievable the difference.
Yeah.
You just can't hardly believe it.
I mean, it's good that they're roping for that kind of money, but it's a shame you all didn't get to see some of that. Of course, 2000 back then in '59 would go a long ways, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would.
Do you get
would.
Do you watch any rodeo these days?
I watch some. I watch some. Not much.
Yeah.
Not a lot.
Yeah. It's changed a lot, hasn't it? For sure.
Well, when they started finding you for jerking them down, that was a part of one of the things that you look for in a calf horse that could stop.
Right.
Really stop good,
Yeah. Now, if they work too much, they hurt you, don't they?
Yeah, if they jerk them down, they'll fine you for it.
Yeah. Huh.
But they always had that rule in New York. You couldn't jerk them down there.
Right. Yeah, back in my grandpa's day, they did. They sure did. And they had trouble with the Humane Society way back in New York, way back in the 30s and 40s,
Yeah, they sure did.
I've heard a lot of stories. But
what about your equipment you used back then, Olin? Where did you get your ropes and pigging strings and things like that?
Well,
because now they have National Roper Supply. I'm sorry.
Places, but I made up all my own ropes after I'd buy them and then make them up,
You were known as a perfectionist with your ropes and the way you made them and just your tack and everything, Where did you get that from? Your dad?
Well, I guess. I imagine.
Yeah.
He never did fool with ropes much, but I know when I first started, I made up all of Troy's ropes for him. I don't know. I just picked it up. It wasn't something I was trained to do or anything. It just
right.
I knew how to do it, but
Right. Those would have been on the steers. Those would have been nylons, right?
Yeah, we used nylons or polys.
Yeah, polys came a little later than the nylons. I don't know exactly what year, but
yeah.
Did
Well,
you?
Sonny and I used we roped with Dacron ropes for a few years there, and they were a little bit bigger than 7/8, and they but they wouldn't stretch.
Right. I remember those.
Nylon ropes stretched a lot.
Oh yeah, a lot of stretch. Yeah, I remember those Dacarans. They didn't seem like they lasted too long. I mean, they kind of went out of style after a while. But
Did you ever did you braid do any of the braiding like Sonny did, where they'd take them old ropes apart and take the strands and braid them in the
Oh yeah,
headstalls?
I've done a lot of that. I've done a lot of that. Or have in the past,
My granddad used to do a bunch of that from out there. Pete Garnett. Did you ever know Pete?
Yeah.
He worked for the sale barn over there at Clovis.
Yes.
Olin, when you got into the steer roping '66, there was a lot of tough ropers, and you seemed to really take to it pretty good. What was the difference? The big difference in going to all those big jackpot steer ropings and stuff. And you kind of slowly got out of the calf roping. Did you like the steer roping as good as the calf roping?
Oh yeah, I really like it. But I preferred calf roping. But Sonny stayed after me for years to rope steers, and we traveled together roping calves a lot. But then he'd break off and he'd have to go to steer ropings. And so, he just kept talking. He finally got me to take one of my old calf horses and make a steer horse out of him. And he wound up being a pretty fair kind of horse.
Yeah. Huh. You couldn't ask for a better guy to travel with than Sonny, could you?
Lord, no. I traveled with some good boys.
Yeah.
I traveled with him and Glenn Franklin and a boy named Jake Bogart.
Yeah. Huh. How many times you win Cheyenne, Olin?
I won it twice in the steer roping.
Yeah.
I know 66 was one year, but I can't tell you that.
Yeah. Well, that's quite a deal, though.
That's a good rodeo up there, Cheyenne.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think about this girls' breakaway roping they've added, Olin, everywhere?
I don't know. I had never seen it, but I've seen them do it, but I haven't seen it. I didn't at Cheyenne.
They added it at Cheyenne and Pendleton and everywhere, and it's really, really growing, and it's created a whole new segment in the horse market. It seems like.
I'm mad and so. Yeah, you bet.
Olin and
there's probably some better horses.
Oh yeah. Olin, in 1970, you were named New Mexico Pro Athlete of the Year. That had to be quite an honor, didn't it?
It sure did.
Not too many people.
Yeah, I was real tickled for that.
Yeah, that's really something.
How did you get from the land of no humidity in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to the land of all humidity down there in Louisiana?
Well, I had a good friend in Dallas. It was a good friend of a fellow here in Louisiana, and he and the fellow in Dallas entered me some in those big steer ropes. And then he wound up hiring me in 1980. He flew to Pendleton and hired me to come to work for him down here to where I'm at now.
You worked for Randy Moore back before that, some, didn't you, Olin?
Oh yeah. Well, Randy there was 4 or 5 different ones that entered me at them big ropings.
Right.
The fellow by the name of Don Looney and Randy Moore, Tom Hunt, and James Justice.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
Yeah. Huh.
Olin, did you ever do any team roping or knot tying back then?
Yeah, I did a little. We sure did.
Did you ever watch Ben Johnson?
I never did do it very much, but I did some.
That always surprises me that a lot of those calf ropers and steer ropers, they didn't do a lot of knot tying back then because it's basically the same but a little different.
Yeah. You got to get off your horse and do something, don't you?
Tie the two back legs.
Yeah.
And that knot tying, did they have to stay tied for any certain amount, or when you threw your hands up, time stopped? And
no, you had to double knot them. They call that a double knot or something. I don't know, but you got to where you could do it pretty good.
Yes, sir.
You just slap your hands together twice and you had them tied.
Yeah, it was all the way you put it on your fingers, wasn't it? Where it just, my dad showed me how to do it a long time ago, but I couldn't tell you now how to do it.
Olin, how did that Olin Young saddle tree come about? Because anybody's heard about the Olin Young rope and saddle tree.
Well, Wendy Ryan is the one that come up with it. And we designed it. I helped him design what I thought I liked in a saddle, And it was pretty popular for a while.
I think it's still pretty popular to this day.
Yeah, I talked to a guy the other night that said he had one. But,
It's definitely one of the more famous saddle trees ever been invented by somebody. So,
what did you think when they moved the finals to Oklahoma City, Olin? Did that change it much, or what was that like?
I was very much against it when they moved them from Oklahoma City to Vegas.
Right.
But that put more money in the rodeo.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's been good for the purses, that's for sure.
Olin, who's the best roper you ever saw?
Well, I've seen some good ones, I'll tell you that.
I have a hard time picking one, but I got two or three I like pretty good.
Well, I've told a lot of people that Olin Young was the best roper I ever saw. And I'm not just saying that. I've told Cody that several times.
Every time we talk about the best roper we ever saw, Jimbo tells me Olin Young is the best roper he ever saw, best rope handler he ever saw, best at handling the pressure he ever saw when it came down to it.
Well, I don't know about that, but
well, Jimbo's a rodeo historian now. That's what he does. And I take his words pretty heavy. Well, Jimbo, what else do we got for Olin today?
Well, just like to thank him for visiting with us today. But dadgum, I grew up in the 60s and 70s watching him rope, and he was definitely one of my heroes. But for the people
that was my better times.
Oh yeah, that was your
60s and 70s.
Yeah, and you were one of the best for sure. And I hope the people that listen to this podcast, maybe that just heard the name Olin Young and weren't lucky enough to see you rope like I did. I hope they realize, come away from this podcast knowing that you were one of the absolute best ropers in the history of the rodeo. And that's what we're all about here at the Ben Johnson Cowboy Museum and the Cowboys of the Osage podcast. We're going to keep the history alive and not let people forget how great Olin Young was. And
well, I think that's wonderful. Appreciate it.
Well, that's the truth too, and I really mean it. And we just really want to thank you for taking the time to visit with us today.
Okay, you betcha.
Hey, Olin, if you had any advice for any young cowboys coming up today, what would it be to become a world champion?
Well, to get you a good horse and get lots of practice. You can't do it without practice.
Practice.
Good.
Practice. The more sweat
That's right.
you put into it, the better you're going to get at something for sure.
That's right.
Well, Olin, thank you for being on here today. We sure appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me and Jimbo. And do you prefer?
Man, I was happy to help you if I could.
Do you prefer green chili or gumbo?
Green chili.
That's right, green chili. There's nothing like New Mexico green chili, is there?
No, sir.
It's some of the best stuff in the world. Here after a while, send me your address. I'll send you all a jar down that we got jarred over in Hatch, New Mexico the other day.
You need my address?
Yeah, I'll get your address as soon as we get off of here today, Olin. And for everybody else, thank you for listening. This has been one of the greatest podcasts we ever had. This is we talked to a truly, truly great man today, and it's just been a highlight of my life. One of the highlights of my life today, Jimbo. Thank you for setting it up.
Me too. Great roper, great and a better person.
Well, thank you.
Hey, we'll see everybody next week right here on the Cowboys of the Osage podcast. Thank y'all for listening.